Having fun?
It has no button.
No.
See?
Having fun?
Okay. I think we can start now, yeah?
Yep, sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this side event by the CGE. I would like to welcome you to the consultative group of expert side events applying IPCC AR6 in climate change reporting. I'm Alpha Kaloga from Guinea, the current CGE chair, and I will be moderating this event. First, let me very briefly introduce you the CGE. The CGE, the consultative group of experts, is a constituent body under the convention, which also serves the Paris Agreement. Its primary mandate is to provide technical assistance and advice to developing country parties on the process and the preparation of national communications, biennial update reports, and biennial transparency reports in a timely and sustainable manner. As per its 2022 work plan, the CGE will update its training materials on adaptation vulnerability and mitigation assessment to ensure that developing country parties are well equipped with the latest knowledge on methodological tools and models which will facilitate preparing the relevant input for their national communication and biennial transparency report. The updated training materials will capture up-to-date information considering the latest guidance adopted for the enhanced transparency framework and biennial transparency report, as well as the IPCC sixth assessment report. In that context, first, we will listen to opening remarks by the SBI Vice Chair, Mr. Juan Carlos Monterrey, and Director of the Transparency Division from the Secretariat, Mr. Donald Cooper. And then we will have two technical sessions, where first we will hear from the CGE on the latest guidance adopted for the operationalization of the enhanced transparency framework and the planned activities of the CGE to support the developing countries' parties. This will be followed by the second section, the panel discussion, which experts from IPCC working groups and representatives from country governments who will provide insight on key findings in the IPCC AR6 report and MRV and ETF implementation experience at national level. Before closing, there will be a 10-minute Q&A where you will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback. As I mentioned before, the outcome of this event will inform the CGE approach for updating its training materials on vulnerability and adaptation and mitigation assessment. So I encourage you all to take the floor at the Q&A session and join the discussions. Let us now start the side event. I would like to invite the SBI Vice Chair to give his welcoming remark. Mr. Juan Carlos Monterrey, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair of the CGE, Alpha Kalogan, Director of Transparency, Donald Cooper, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to be here in person at this CGE event, applying IPCC AR6 in climate change reporting. I wish to thank you, the CGE, for this invitation, and I also would like to extend the thankfulness from Marianne, who sadly could not be here with you all today. The work of the SBI is at the core of all the issues related to the implementation of the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. In the context of the implementation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement, issues relating to support to developing country parties, and more specifically, the role of the CGE as a constituted body to provide technical advice and support to these parties is very, very, very important. The CGE has a long history and experience in delivering on its mandate. The SBI welcomed the annual progress reports for 2020 and 2021 on the work of the CGE and 4 additional reports capturing the outcomes of key activities of the CGE undertaking in 2020 and 2021. I would also like to extend the appreciation of the SBI to the CGE for successfully implementing its work plans for 2020 and 2021 during the coronavirus disease pandemic, which ensured that developing country parties continue to receive technical advice and support for preparing their national communications, biannual update reports, and the upcoming biennial transparency reports. As you all know, the Enhanced Transparency Framework provides the process by which nations gather relevant data and information to keep track of progress towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. Further technical work on the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for the ETF has been completed with tables, outlines, and other formats for the reports agreed. We are in a very critical phase as the Paris Agreement enters into full implementation mode, and the CGE has a very, very unique and important position to support the developing countries in enhancing their domestic capacities. And with the adoption of the revised terms of reference of the CGE at COP26 in Glasgow last November, the CGE is now fully empowered to provide technical support and assistance to developing countries on the implementation of the ETF. This side event is expected to be an opportunity for the audience as well as for the CGE to be advised by experts from the IPCC and country representative on how to take into account the findings from AR6 to the national level and how to inform national policy formulation. I also would like to thank the IPCC experts that are present for their time. We understand that your agenda is very, very busy, so your time at this event is very well noted and appreciated. I welcome you all here today to share your knowledge, experience, and insights. And, before everything, I hope you have fun in this room where science dictates everything that we have to do. Thank you very much for the invitation. And now I pass it back to the chair, Mr. Kolonga.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuan. I would like now to invite Mr. Donald Cooper, Director of Transparency Division. Don, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I apologize in advance. I'm in a weird mood today. My daughter graduated from high school, had the ceremony last night, headed off to the prom tonight, then off to university in Canada to study psychology in September. And believe me, I'm going to need a psychologist in the family after all of this. And that brings up all sorts of great stuff and some really worrying stuff. So I'm conflicted. I'm getting old. She's moving on in life. What it demonstrates to me is passage of time. Right? I have 2 kids about the same age. And when I used to arrive at Geneva Airport, they would both run and jump into my arms, and I could hold them up comfortably. Now they're both taller than I am. Time moved along. So what I've been contemplating over the evening was some of those things that happened as time moved along. And it's quite amazing how memorable those things are. I don't have to try. And when I think of the journey, especially in the last 5 or 6 years of the CGE, I don't have to think about the highlights. They're just there. And that's because they were so great and so often they became expected. And that, I think, is the hallmark of success in our system. some of the numbers are unbelievable. 7,000. It used to be remarkable if we could reach 700 delegates in workshops or trainings or whatever in a year. But 7,000? That is just mind-boggling. But that's what they did. Right? As a response to the request from the parties, that's what they did. Now, I have the good fortune of being able to sit in on the meetings without the responsibility of delivering. So I get to enjoy the meeting. And the atmosphere in the room, even when you have issues that are very controversial, is very accommodating. It's as if friends are sitting around over a coffee or a glass of wine talking about the issue, and I can listen to you and you can listen to me, even though I think you're talking nonsense. Right? So they have created a positive work environment that has delivered. As a result, we have created a very useful tool that the parties are now applying to one of its new core mandates, the Enhanced Transparency Framework, and applying that tool with every confidence that it will deliver. On the other hand, we have a household name, the IPCC. Many people don't know what it does, but they know about the IPCC. And within the review world, it's always IPCC this, IPCC that. In other words, it's the hallmark by which others are judged. Right? In the UN system, we have created this new interpretation of a word, sexy. When something is really attractive and people want to jump on board and want to do it, it's considered to be sexy. Here today, you've got two of the sexiest institutions in the climate world coming together on behalf of parties and the ETF, the CGE and the IPCC. Sorry, Tuba, I know you thought I was going to say the Secretariat, but no. We don't quite come up to those standards. Here we are applying information technology, new standards, and immediately jumping to the next stage of, did that work for you? How can I take that on board? So self-learning. The process is evolving to the point where enough of us are aware that we can drive how our own national pathway should go and what is advantageous to us, and then take advantage of those tools that are there. So I want to thank you all for making our lives really easy, serving as the Secretariat to the CGE, to give us the glimmer of what could be when we are addressing things that really aren't working out. You could always think, yes, but when we go over there, we know this one is going to work out. So it balances itself out. So for giving us that vision of what it looks like when it works. So I am very keen to hear the next level. And then after that, the next level. And to look at the new and creative ways in which the IPCC is brought into the process. In other words, information, guidelines, technology, science, a solid logical background is brought into the process that is allowing countries to develop policies, programs, direction, legal base. It's the perfect way of ensuring that they get the best result. So I wish everybody great luck. And Mr. Chair, let me congratulate you on a successful year. I know it's not over yet, but I will be saying the same thing at the end of the year. Congratulations on a successful year.
Thank you very much, Don, and thanks for your inspiring remark and your positive mindset, because I think the work we are doing, we need a positive and a belief that we can capacitate those countries to have a better understanding of climate actions, report in the manner that can inform our global effort towards the agreement, the achievement of a Paris Agreement and the Convention. So thank you, Mr. Yuan, and thank you, Dawn, for your remarks and for the guidance and support that you are providing the SBI, but also the Secretariat. And I know you've been very humble. The CGE will not be the same if we do not have a great Secretariat. So thank you for your remark. And I would like to continue now in the next session. We will now start the first session and hear from the CGE on latest guidance adopted for the operationalization of the enhanced transparency framework and the planned activities of the CGE to support developing country parties. I would like to give the floor to my fellow CGE member, Mr. Kyoto Tanabe. Mr. Kyoto, you have the floor.
Yep. Thank you, Alpha. And hello, everyone. Welcome all of you from me to this side event. I'm Kyoto Tanabe, a member of the CGE from the IPCC. I'm going to talk about CGE support to developing country parties, which I hope will give you some background of the topics to be discussed by the panelists following this presentation. Go ahead, please. Let me start my presentation by reminding you of the latest outcomes on transparency from the Glasgow conference last November. At that conference, CMS3, a set of operational guidance was adopted in Decision 5 CMS3 for reporting information under the Enhanced Transparency Framework, ETF. Those are, for example, common reporting tables on greenhouse gas inventories, common tabular formats on tracking progress of NDCs, and among others, outlines for biannual transparency report, BTR, etc. In addition, to promote enhanced support to developing country parties, guidance to GEF was adopted, and also the role of CGE was clarified again, referring to paragraph 15 of Decision 18 CMA1. And according to that decision, the role of CGE includes facilitating the provision of technical advice and support to developing country parties as applicable, including for the preparation and submission of their BTRs and facilitating improved reporting over time. As you know, parties are required to swiftly make necessary preparations for ensuring timely reporting under the ETF. Specifically, the first BTR should be submitted by December 2024. And CGE is tasked to support developing country parties in making such preparations. Go ahead, please. No. Sorry, yes. To fulfill this mandate, 2 years ago, the CGE developed its mission, vision, and strategic priorities until 2026, and revised it this year based on the Glasgow outcomes and also based on its program of work. In that context, in the period from 2020 to 2022, CGE has continued identifying gaps and needs, and also trying to promoting understanding of the existing MRV arrangement under the convention, and also has tried to introduce and facilitate transition from MRV to the ETF. Then, in the period from 2022 to 2024, CGE will promote and facilitate implementation of the ETF, in particular, the preparation and submission of VTRs under the ETF, and also those of national communications under the convention. During these two phases, CGE continuously pays attention to relevant lessons learned and good practices obtained. Then, in the subsequent phase, in the subsequent phase, namely the period from 2024 to 2026, a number of BTRs will have been already submitted and available. Taking advantage of that, CGE will gather lessons learned and good practices from those submitted BTRs in order to identify and understand areas for improvement and refine the approaches and tools that are used to provide technical advice and support. In addition, CGE will, of course, continue facilitating implementation of the ETF. In line this vision, mission, and the strategic priorities, CGE set up a work program for 2022 to 2026, consisting of 3 work streams. Work stream 1 is supporting implementation of the existing MRV arrangements under the convention by developing country parties, and also facilitating the transition to and implementation of the ETF. And this is work stream 1. Work stream 2 is stock taking of the lessons learned and good practices, understanding the areas of improvement, refining the approaches and tools that are used to provide technical advice and support, and also try to help the implementation of the existing, not only the existing MRV arrangements, but also the ETF under the Paris Agreement. Work stream 3 is promoting collaboration and engagement with key stakeholders and enhancing other activities. So we have these 3 work streams. In carrying out this work program, CGE has identified 4 key activity areas. They are knowledge products, knowledge delivery, capacity building needs assessment, and collaboration and engagement. What is the first key activity area? Knowledge products by the CGE. They are, for example, technical handbooks on MRV and ETF, which is available in all UN languages. And also CGE toolbox on institutional arrangements, which is also available in all UN languages. Video animations, infographics, and so on and so forth. Here, I would like to draw your special attention to, among others, the Cge Training Materials and e-learning courses on reporting, adaptation, and mitigation. Cge is now in the process of revising these training materials on adaptation, vulnerability, and mitigation assessments. In so doing, we are trying to capture up-to-date information considering the latest operational guidance adopted by CMA, and also the latest science, particularly from the IPCC 6 assessment report, Working Group 2, Working Group 3 reports, which were released earlier this year. We hope the panel discussion today will be very helpful to this revision process. The second key activity area, that is knowledge delivery. This is materialized in the form of regional training workshops and also in the form of regional webinars. every year, CGE discusses what issues should be prioritized and focused on, taking into consideration relevant lessons learned and results of capacity building needs assessment. Once the themes of training workshops and webinars are agreed upon, then the CGE organizes those workshops and webinars with full support from the Secretariat. This year, in 2022, regional hands-on training workshops will focus on tracking progress of NDCs. And the regional webinar for this year will focus on how climate transparency arrangements matter at the national level. These regional training workshops and regional webinars will be organized soon. For details, please keep your eyes on the UNFCCC CGE website. The third key activity area, which is capacity building needs assessment by the CGE. This is done in two ways. One is by producing a CGE annual technical paper, which is a compilation of information from submitted BURs and national communications about problems, constraints, lessons learned, and capacity building needs. Another way of capacity building needs assessment done by the CGE is to conduct a biannual stocktake survey, which is to collect up-to-date information directly from developing country parties about problems, constraints, lessons learned, etc., etc. The last one, the fourth key activity area is collaboration and engagement. This is done through various channels such as CGE website, social media, and a help desk. And in this context, I would like you to note that a CGE informal forum is held annually, usually towards the end of the year. This informal forum is to bring together key stakeholders to seek feedback on its work, and also to brainstorm on key factors to enable successful implementation of the MRV and also the ETF. Thus, the CGE is actively working in 3 work streams and through 4 key activity areas to support developing country parties in fulfilling their transparency reporting requirements. The CGE is fully aware of the necessity to keep these supports updated to the extent possible, taking the latest available science, and now, particularly this year, is high time to do such update, in particular of the training materials on adaptation and mitigation. We believe we can do it in the light of the IPCC 6 assessment report, Working Group 2 and Working Group 3 reports are released earlier this year. And such updates of training materials will help parties to prepare the chapters relating to adaptation and mitigation in their national transparency reports. Therefore, I really look forward to hearing the panel discussion today, which will shed lights on the possible way forward for CGE to go. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tokyo, for the presentation. For the participant, we will have, as I indicated earlier, after the presentations, the different Q&As, and we very much encourage you to be proactive there. I would like now to invite the second part of the panel, which is consisting of a panel on translating science into actions at national level. We will now go into the discussion, and I would like to call upon Dr. Carlos Mendez from IPCC Working Group 2, who is the CGE member, Mr. Amjad Abdullah, Vice Chair of IPCC Working Group 3, and Dr. Kakanyo Fani Dintwa from Botswana. Yes. As I indicated, the purpose of this panel discussion is to ensure that the panelists in presenting, in making their presentation, to kindly make suggestions and advice to the CGE based on the key finding of the IPCC and to the MRV and enhanced transparency implementation experience at national level. So I would like first to ask Mr. Carlos and Mr. Amjad from IPCC to take the floor. Mr. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon to the audience, and thank you very much for the invitation to its important side event. Since the invitation, and I was doing an exercise for try to super summarize our report in the IPCC Working Group 2, because as you know, is a long report to summarize in short time. But I rescue some elements of the report that I think we are useful to discuss today. In three, I see three very big areas. The first, the frame, the conceptual frame that advanced in relation to the AR5. And the second is the diagnosis of the problem when we have new found. And the third is the solutions, the space of the solution of the report. And in this exercise of super summarize, I think that a conceptual framework incorporate in a new way the mega trends around the world, like a rapid urbanization, unsustainable consumption of the nature resource, and land degradation, social and economic inequalities, of course, the recent pandemic, and among other important mega trends. At the same time, also in the frame, emphasize the importance of the interdependence of the climate, ecosystem and biodiversity, and also human society. This is an important aspect because we know that the support of the life on our planet depend of the natural systems. For the diagnosis, the report is found in the assessment of the impacts and risk. Three results I want to remark on these three results. The first, the impacts are widely distributed around the world and sectors. The second is the impact and risk are coming before we previously estimate that this signifies that we need to attend this in an urgent manner. And the third is the multiple hazard combination at the same time, origin complex, compound, and cascading risk that are difficult to manage. So considering this, the report assessed a possible space for solution, and these solutions I divide these solutions in two very big types. Our traditional type of solution that is adaptation, and the second is new in the scientific literature, is the climate resilience development. Trying to link the adaptation and also mitigation to the necessity of the development. So, respect to adaptation, we have several options for adaptation applicable to different regional and national priorities and circumstances, as well as for sectors. We have a very intensive assessment in the report on the feasibility of adaptation option by system transitions. These system transitions we assessed also in 1.5 report, and are land and ocean ecosystems, urban and infrastructural, energy, industry, and of course, societal transitions. Sorry. In this transition, we assessed at least 22 climate responses and adaptation options. Those include, of course, sectors, like important sectors for development, like water, food, energy, among others, and also its relation to equity and justice. In the second grid area of the solution, climate resilient development, I want to remark that CRD are not a recipe. If not, the CRD should be adapted to the necessities and priorities and national circumstances of each country and region. And we try to respond to the question of what do we need to act to achieve climate resilient development. Due to the CRD is not a recipe, we have some common elements that characterize or define this development. And we can mention here inclusive governance, adequate and appropriate human and technological resource, information, capacity, and finance. And of course, we can add more and mention international cooperation and equity and justice. In regards to the second question, how this key finding, or what will be key findings and elements to integrate in the preparation of NCs, national communications, and BTRs? I think that several elements will be useful for preparing NCs and BTRs. And of course, the applicability and feasibility of this depends on regional and national priorities and circumstances. Considering this, I want to remark two outstanding findings. One of these is about systemic transitions, and other about CRD. The system transitions could help frame those actions necessary to achieve transition and eventually transformation, especially the consumption and production system, and therefore our relationship to nature. Even though the CRD is not a recipe, the common elements that define CRD also include some elements that maybe are useful to incorporate to NCs as part of the planification, and thereafter as part of the report on BTRs. And this element can contribute to move toward the track of CRD and achieving the Paris Agreement objective. That's all. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you, Dr. Carlos. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Amjad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Alpha.
Please be reminded that to the presenters that if each of you have 7 minutes to allow for at least 10 minutes Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alpha. I'll try to be very brief. I know that given the limited time, just to provide the context, just to give you the background of, I know that Working Group 3 is mitigation on climate change. Primarily, the report provides an update at global assessment on climate change and mitigation progress and pledges and examines the sources of global emissions. It also explains the developments in emission reduction and mitigation efforts, assessing the impacts of national climate pledges in relation to long-term goals. Of course, the questions that was posed to me also, I just wanted to highlight that the Working Group 3 introduced also several new components in the new assessment report. One of is a new chapter on social aspects of mitigation, which also explores the demand side, that is what drives consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. This chapter is a partner to the sectoral chapters in the report, which explores the supply side of climate change, what produces emissions. I'll try to also provide some of the key summary points from the SPM that was approved earlier this year based on the questions. What is new in AR6 compared to AR5 in relation to, of course, mitigation assessments at the global region level and sub-region levels? If you look at the report, the recent developments and current trends, focusing on emissions, technology, policy, emissions and implementation gaps. The report also focuses on system transformation to limit global warming, that is global emission mitigation pathways, mitigation options by sectors. Integration, costs, potential, and costs and benefits. Mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development, which is key. I know that while undertaking the different kinds of reporting. Linkages, just transition. The other aspect is strengthening the response. The feasibility. Of course, I just wanted to highlight that the IPCC does not provide the policy prescriptive information, but policy relevant information. Because some may question feasibility, but this is something that I just wanted to highlight, that we provide policy relevant information based on the assessment. The governance and policy, finance, technology, and international cooperation. On the novel elements, mitigation and development, obviously the shift in development pathways towards sustainability is key in the report, which is highlighted. As I indicated, the demand side, services, and social aspects of mitigation, that is the new chapter that was quite something that the Working Group 3 undertook. Innovation, technology, development, and transfer, another new chapter which may be quite attractive for the purpose of the reporting. Again, a more extensive treatment of carbon dioxide removal. Characteristics of model global emission pathways in the literature. What is, again, on the knowledge side, what has advanced since AR5? If you look at that, the drivers and constraints of low carbon transitions are better understood, including the breadth and the extent of the systematic change requires limit warming. Obviously, the growing feasibility of low carbon electrification, a core option for transport and industry in cities especially. There was also further insights from the sector case studies of successful technology development and transfer, the effective demonstrations of low carbon industrial processes, increased understanding of the linkages and trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation, again, linking with the sustainable development. On the importance of social science and sustainable development has been increasingly recognized in the report, including how behavioral change motivates and can contribute to the efforts of mitigation undertakings. How attention to justice, equity, and fairness, and now this is something that the delegates are quite densely focusing on, the equity, justice, fairness can help shift the development pathways towards sustainability and build consensus on transformational changes. Importance of understanding local and regional contexts in shifting development pathways towards sustainability. On the knowledge gap, which remains, including the real-world feasibility, I know that it's very difficult when it comes to reality on the ground. The real-world feasibility of scenarios that embody prompt, ambitious mitigation actions, and the plausibility of the extensive CDR. How the global benefits of mitigation may change with warming levels, including economic repercussions, social and environmental limits on the pace and the extent of the change. The opportunities, limitations, reversibility of ecosystem-based mitigation and adaptation. Again, on the data and methodological advances could tackle many knowledge gaps, including low-income countries remains poorly represented in the literature on mitigation and in studies on innovation and technology development and transfer. Data quality, frequency, and resolutions of global GHG estimates needs to be further improved, along with the causal mechanism between individual, social, and structural drivers of change. Uncertainty in contemporary emissions and sinks within effluent is still high, including inventories, accounting systems, and emission factors. The effectiveness of mitigation policies, including industry, remains poorly understood, as industry is often sheltered from climate policy due to the concerns of competitiveness of carbon leakage. That's it. Thank you very much, Alpha. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Amjad. And as you have seen, we have the first part on science, and now we are going to go how this science is translated and understood at national level. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dintwa from Botswana. And I would like to call upon Mr. Thiago Amendes. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, please, of course.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Kaka Nyofani Dintwa from Botswana. I'll be giving you an overview of the country experience based on what has transpired with regards to the MRV and other related activities. My approach would be a bundled approach to the two questions that have been posed to the panelists. I would first give a country situation on what has transpired in relation to the climate science information into climate action. And Botswana, like other parties, has been undertaking IMRV through the national communications. We have done so far 3 communications, the initial, the second, and the third. We have the national inventory reports that have fed into the national communications. We have also produced the first panel update report, among others. And but with the advent of Paris Agreement, parties have been have to develop the NDCs and robust MRV meeting the ETF, which is required to transparently show if parties are moving towards their targets defined in the NDCs, and to track the implementation of mitigation and adaptation measures. And zooming into those national documents that have been produced, we have the latest National Inventory Report for 2014-2015, which is the current one, which was prepared in accordance with the Decision 17 of CP8 and Article 4 and Article 12. And there's a process, the conventions of methane and N2Os and HFCs emissions to CO2 equivalent were based on the second assessment report. Second assessment report because this was attributable to the fact that we used an older version of the 2006 IPCC software. Apologies. With regards to the national communications, I'll also focus on the TNC, which is referred to as the third national communication, which also used the average IPCC AR4 climate model projections and the low and high emission scenarios in undertaking the vulnerability assessment of the prioritized sectors. And the greenhouse gas inventory component was also based on the second assessment report. And then moving it to the first biennial update report, which also we compiled the inventory for the year 2015. We used the 2006 IPCC software version 2.54 for data entry, for emission calculations and results and analysis for all the sectors. And then the good practice guidelines and stint management in national greenhouse gas inventory also used during the preparation of this report. And the second assessment report was also used during the process of the compilation of the inventory. Moving forward, we are currently developing or preparing the first adaptation communication. The country is finalizing the report as we speak, and it's going to be submitted as a standalone submission to the Climate Change Secretariat. And the 4 vulnerability assessment for the sectors have been done for crops, for livestock, for water health, biodiversity, and including the infrastructure vulnerability assessment, which has long been overlooked. And then the report also used the average IPCC AR4 climate model projections. Okay, and the other national project that is ongoing right now is the regional approach to Tier 2 cattle greenhouse gas inventory compilation project. And the project is funded by the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre, which is obviously geared towards helping the country transition from using the Tier 1 method to going to an advanced Tier 2 for the livestock sector. The objective of the assignment is to provide support to Botswana to develop Tier 2 cattle GSG inventory based on the country's specific and shared regional data. And fifth assessment report is envisaged to be used during the process of compilation of the greenhouse gas inventory for the livestock sector. And then I'll move swiftly to the transition to enhanced transparency framework for the country. ICAT is working with Botswana government to develop the enhanced transparency framework, which will replace the MRV system that have been in place. It aims to track the implementation of the NDCs for the country based on the ETF. And currently, the MRV framework for climate action in Botswana is relatively in its infancy stage. We are starting. So the ICAT's overall objective is to develop the MRV transparency system for the energy and the transport sectors. The reason being that these actually constitute some of the key categories in terms of the emission estimates that have been identified in the previous inventories. This will be achieved through capacity building programs with national stakeholders, training on MRV concepts, methods, tools, including the interactive testing and application of the ICAT guidance. Moving on to the experiences and challenges. There is inadequate data to be used to assess and monitor greenhouse gas reduction measures. As a result, the NDC tracking becomes a bit limited. Tools for tracking the GHG reduction measures commonly applied in similar countries should also be considered for use at our country. And the country has an arrangement in place for the GHG inventory, which is a bit enhanced and robust. We have a team of experts from different ministries and departments, which constitute the team for each and every sector: the energy sector, the waste sector, the Afolu sector, land use, forestry, and agriculture, then also for IPPU. Statistics Botswana has established a QS system in place, which should be adopted nationally for the ETF. The ETF should take advantage of the structures that are in place, because most of the data is actually official data. It's stored at Statistics Botswana, and it has quite a variety of statistics, either trade, either education, either health, either environment statistics, national accounts, population and demography, to mention but a few. For the purpose of data provision, which is key in actually achieving the enhanced transparency framework, there is need to sign memorandum of understanding with data providers, including the private sector, to involve them in committees for their active participation to prioritize data, because it's often difficult to get access data from the private sector. We have to sell to them what climate is, what benefits they can derive from that, and what incentives they can also benefit out of that. And the support needs, obviously, capacity building, and, for example, generating the activity data, land use, land cover conversions, and matrix and stuff like that, and then a capacity building in using the upper tier methods for, especially for key categories across the sectors. And then we also have support needs for financially to help transition from tier 1 to tier 2, to also help develop country-specific emission factors, because we all rely on the default emission factors, which sometimes would underestimate or overestimate the emissions from all these other sectors. You know, in terms of the NAP process, for example, would have climate financing skills and competencies that are needed to actually help the NAP process. We also need capacity and NAP implementation plans and so on. So, Chair, let me go this far because of the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Mr. Idris Yamikani to present, bearing in mind that we have 15 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here and to present, to respond to some of the questions relating to how at national level we are translating climate change science into policies. And I think that's very important, and that's why we have the science itself to help us translate it. So in response to the recent science, as you might all be aware, Malawi was among parties who submitted the revised NTC, which was really considering the recent alert which science gave us that we all have a collective responsibility to respond to the climate change. So in our revised NTC, we included how we want to reduce our emissions, as well as how we intend to really adapt to the adverse impacts which science is telling us that those impacts are there and will be there unless we all collectively take the responsibility. In the same line, we are in the process of developing our first NAP, and indeed our NAP responds to the science in line with how can we adapt. We thank our science by telling us some of the several options in how adaptation can be taken. So we are hoping that through the NAP process, we'll be able to have concrete ways on how we can advance the adaptation priority of the country. So we also had our technology needs assessment done, and that 10A also responds to the recent science, where we also referencing to technological advice which was provided in the recent assessment reports. But more interestingly is about the call for green development pathways, which has also been mentioned in the previous presentation. As a country, we have developed our new vision where we call it Malawi 2063, which has put at the center environmental sustainability as a key enabler, where we want to develop in a green way despite being among the vulnerable countries. So in terms of now reporting, I'll explain more about the recent one. We are lucky to also be among the countries who have received support under the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, where we want to institute systems in place in considering the use of the recent IPCC softwares and the guidelines in reporting, including our inventories and the BTRs. So we are looking forward to strengthen our capacity in reporting. So the challenges remain on how finance will be available to help us implement the policies and plans we have mentioned. And that's why we keep on calling to our development partners to continue also providing support on implementation of the policies which us vulnerable countries develop in responding to the science which is alerting us. And as a country ourselves, we have developed what we call the National Climate Change Fund, which we want to make it operational so that we can also explore the domestic financing so that we should also respond to adverse impacts of climate change, which science is telling us. So for now, that's what I can share. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will now give the floor to Mr. Tiago.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alpha. It's a pleasure to participate in such a bright event with our colleagues from Malawi and Botswana. As you might see, like part of the coordination of the Lusophone cluster countries. Just to explain that to colleagues that might not ever heard about Lusophone. Lusophone means Portuguese-speaking countries. So it's a group of 9 countries distributed in 4 continents that comprehends Angola, Brazil, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea Equatorial, São Tomé and Príncipe, Mozambique, and Timor-Leste, and of course Portugal. Basically, we are working towards the support of the Lusophone countries to be able to have access to the information not only from science and IPCC, but also from UNFCCC, and Cge is actually a special partner for us, as it was presented by our able colleague from Cge Kyoto. Beyond all the UN languages, Cge also presents in its website the Cge materials also in Portuguese, reaching about 300 million people that lives in those countries. And it's actually very important to have and to send this message to Cge to take into account the differences and inequalities in terms of reaching the information to countries that do not speak UN languages. This creates an incredible barrier to actually assimilate the information from science, and also on how to translate that to the policymakers from those countries. Just to present some of the activities that we have done using the latest information from AR6. We had this year 2 very interesting activities on training associated with the information that's based on the latest AR6 IPCC report, both in Mozambique and also in São Tomé and Príncipe, where we had the chance to have in São Tomé and Príncipe a training to present the latest information for the Climate Change Committee. It's the high a level committee that informs the central government, the national government, about the basic information on how to decide about climate change. In Mozambique, we had a very interesting training in combination with partners such as UNDP and NDC Partnership and the Belgian government to actually have a very straightforward conversation on how the information provided by the AR6 could be incorporated in terms of having budget tagging and budget allocation and budget planning on regards to climate change. As you might be aware, Mozambique is a country that actually is already suffering from adverse impacts of climate change. As you might be aware, in the NDC from Mozambique, you have the data from the extreme weather events, and this has a major impact on the quality of the public expenditure. And the information from IPCC and the information from Cge could be adjusted in a manner, in a narrative, there would be useful for budget planning and development planning officials. The exercise that we are doing in Mozambique, that it would pretty much important to share with Cge, because this is also potentially viable to be replicated in other countries, is how to find the correct indicators to use as a proxy for adaptation. Most of our countries in the cluster have a very big difficulty to produce data for adaptation. The national systems are not well equipped, and also there is a very big need and gaps on capacity building. The decision that Mozambique had created to reach a very interesting approach of low costs is to use the SDGs indicators as a proxy for adaptation. And they are using that for climate budget tagging. So it could be a very important feedback for the designing of the Cge materials. We are very much looking for that these materials are ready, so we can actually translate also into Portuguese and reach our countries. And finally, beyond thanking also the partners of the Lusophone cluster, which is the government of Belgium, the government of Germany, GF, UNDP, and UNEP, it's pretty much important to leave this final message for the Cge and IPCC to provide us with the correct formulation of communication to be able to be absorbed by the policy level. The first point is that we need to translate data that are for the end of the century to be meaningful for a short period of time, because policymakers, they decide in a time span of 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, at most 8 years. And most of the models provide us data to the end of the century. Mm-hmm. So we need to try to translate this information in a manner that it will be meaningful for that. The second point, it is to also be very much aware that there are 3 different steps, and the information on reporting needs to be adjusted to these 3 different steps. To report on impacts are completely different on reporting on vulnerability. And to report on adaptation action is also different from reporting on vulnerability. So we need to have a very good thought on it to make sure that we provide the correct tools for impact assessment, vulnerability mapping, and the quality of the adaptation actions. And that's basically the information that I would like to share. Thank you very much for the invitation again.
Thank you, and thank you to all presenters. And I would like now to request the participant to ask some questions. I will take 3 people first. Andrew.
Thanks. The one thing that AR6 seems to have highlighted both in Working Group 2 and Working Group 3 is the lack of data in many developing countries on both on an inventory level and on particularly in relation to adaptation. And there's quite a good section in the chapter on Africa in Working Group 2 on data problems related to adaptation. And we've been wondering for a number of years whether it wouldn't in fact help for the IPCC to establish an equivalent body to the task force on inventories for adaptation information, and whether this would not be a very good way to both strengthen reporting on adaptation and also identify ways in which we could deal with some of these gaps. I was just wondering whether we've now got to the point where that would be something we should look at seriously. Thanks.
Another question? I think you did a great job, presenters. But I think the question is very important in the sense that in most of the developing countries, adaptation remains a priority, and also most of the developing countries, at least the small countries that do not have that space for mitigation, it is about sustainable development. So I think the question goes to all participants. We would like to hear from the Cge, from IPCC, but also at country level how inventory on adaptation can shift the quality of the data moving forward. So perhaps you give the floor to Kyoto, going to Mr. Amjad, and then we make the round here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think, Andrew, you raised a very important question, but I think Kyoto will probably respond on the data. Even in my presentation, I think one of the gaps is the data. I know that usually in IPCC, we have very rigorous assessments, but we do also use some of the gray literature. That's something that we often use it, but then it's not as much as the peer-reviewed kind of data literature that we use, because the first-hand information that we use in the IPCC processes is the peer-reviewed ones. But we do recognize, especially in the developing world, you do not have the kind of the luxury of these. But then again, like we leave it up to the authors, and of course the CLAs and of course the co-chairs do undertake a certain kind of information that is kind of more mature. I know that since we are going to be, I mean, I'm not prejudging on the global goal and adaptation, but perhaps I think it may perhaps be useful in the future, but obviously that's going to be something that will decide in the next assessment. And obviously it has to come from the parties, the need for IPCC's work, because IPCC works on the request of the parties, maybe Kyoto and Carlos.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure, but what I heard is that the adaptation committee has already identified that need for kind of a methodological guidance for adaptation assessment. And Adaptation Committee has already approached to the working group 2 of the IPCC, and the consultation, I think, is going on, to my understanding. So it may take time, but in the future, that kind of task force on, not task force on inventories, but that kind of task force may or may not be formed, and also, but even if the task force, particular task force, is not formed, and that kind of methodological guidance may be considered and developed in the future. That's my understanding.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. This is a very relevant question because at the same time is related to the equity and justice in the matter of adaptation and climate resilient development, because information is the base to take decisions. So I fully agree with my partners here from the IPCC. And I just to add that I just say the authors also can use some great literature, and the important part of the great literature is the opportunity of the countries to elaborate this great literature in the form of national communication and BTRs, and this is a great opportunity to complete this gap of knowledge and include this in the report. At the same time, we have also other metrics, not only the adaptation, and we have the necessity of adaptation, and we can determine the gap of adaptation that is also relevant information for playing the adaptation and playing on this adaptation on the uncertainty or big uncertainty environment. So we of course we can enhance our information and our indicators on adaptation, but with the information we have now, we can also plan how to act to enhance adaptation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My contribution here would be to maybe enhance the involvement of national statistical offices and issues relating to the data needs and data requirements. For example, there's a global set of climate change indicators and statistics that is being developed by the UNSD, the Environment Unit there. So the statistics is informed by international frameworks such as the UNFDES, the Sendai framework, the SDGs and stuff like that. So you can be able to extract the exact indicators that you need with regards to issues of adaptation, mitigation, and so on. And what is also important, it's the metadata of the indicators, because sometimes you go to countries, you don't have the metadata, the data about the data, so that they really know, because sometimes the data is available, but the way it's packaged, it doesn't convey any, it doesn't ring a bell to say we have a data on such indicators. So the involvement of national statistical offices and such working groups, it's very, very, very important. Thank you.
Yes, this is a very interesting question, and I believe that we have already a very interesting approach, as you had raised. The TFI have already this structure on how to incentivize the academia to produce data to go until the regional and potentially to the national level. Kakanyo indicated something that's crucial for this part, which is how can we go to the national level production of data. So normally we discuss that about emissions factors, but this will be also necessary for the adaptation too. And the framework that you have on designing specific sectors and concentrating experts on a sectorial level, I believe this could facilitate a lot the work of IPCC on reducing the costs of the production of potentially, let's say, dreaming here together with all, guidelines for impact assessments, guidelines for vulnerability mapping, guidelines for how to design adaptation actions. If we could try to frame on towards that direction, I believe the exercise of the BTRs will be much more straightforward, because we could then ask Cge to help us on framing trainings for that, and we will translate into Portuguese. So we are very keen and waiting for the implementation of such a suggestion from Andrew, and we hope that that IPCC could go and agree with creation of such task force. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair. And I agree with the suggestion made by Andrew. There's really a need out there for indicators and how we really report information on adaptation. And now also interesting discussion going on how this information can also be reviewed. So we really need more guidance and clarification from the IPCC and Adaptation Committee, so that this should be made easy. As you know, adaptation is key, and its information is very important to advance the adaptation work in most of the developing countries. So as said by Tiago, we are so ambitious and so positive that the IPCC, through the Adaptation Committee, will really find a way on how to support this work. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you. I guess we are 10 minutes after the hour. I will try to make a short, very short summary. I think we have seen there is innovation in the IPCC, and but there is a need at national level to convert backward the long perspective of projection into, very short-term data or information or recommendation to inform policy-making process. We have seen also that in some case studies, there are different methodologies, policies, and tools from IPCC that have been used, AR4, AR5, AR6, that actually is a strong signal to the CGE that there's a capacity needs that is required and important, and particularly to help those that are not having the methodology and the capacity to have a basic in order to transition for the enhanced transparency framework. I think also it is very important to have a country-specific approach. First, to use the gray area to present evidence-based information that the scientists can use in terms of informing the policy-making process, but also to encourage countries to work to actually reflect the country circumstances. I think the budgeting, tagging, and planning process is very important, and those best practices should be used by the CGE to disseminate, because climate information, climate expenditure, and reporting is needed for the enhanced transparency framework. I also think that we need to have benchmark in the sense that the IPCC science is unpacked into guidance that are straightforward, user-friendly for countries, in order to help those that need capacity to report to the best available capacity and capability. So with that, I will very much thank you, and the CGE, I would like to thank also the CGE Secretariat for arranging this event. And my maximum thank goes to the different presenter. It was very rich and informing, particularly for me, and thank you again.